So now all of a sudden we're in a place where things are more expensive. But guess what? If I was used to having, an emergency savings for 6 months, and now I have an emergency savings that's a year,
and my debt rate's down,
and I used to have $10,000 of credit card debt, and $10,000 of student loans, but through COVID and now with this forgiveness, I'm basically almost to zero.
Yep.
So what can happen? Hey, that trip that you were planning on taking, the plane ticket's 50% more expensive.
Yep.
Oh, that's okay. I'll just use my credit card because I'm used to having
some debt,
right?
Yeah.
Or, hey, gas is more expensive. Maybe we should cancel that weekend trip. Nah, it's okay. I'll just pull a little money out of savings. I have a year and I only need 6 months. Right? We're compensating. We were super healthy.
Yep.
Now we're compensating.
That's only going to last so long.
We're good to go.
All right, welcome back to Debt Rate Month. Or no, we're on Burn Rate. Scratch that.
Burn rate.
Just edit, move.
I'm not going to.
Go to Burn Rate.
We are in Burn Rate Month.
Debt Rate was last month.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was a good month. So we're going to get there. We're going to talk a little bit more about Burn Rate. This will probably be the last Burn Rate episode that we do for a little while. But it's so important to understand spending. Like it is, it is vitally important. It's not a restrictive tool to measure your spending behaviors. It should be an empowerment tool, right? Like understanding at what point I'm comfortable spending the money I'm spending, because then it just becomes like, hey, this is my lifestyle. This is where I'm comfortable. This is what I need, and that's one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle too. Like figuring out retirement. Looking into the future and knowing, having calm and confidence about tomorrow versus anxiety and fear, which is being perpetuated at the moment because we're just staring at this monster called inflation that is seemingly like unwilling to go away.
Right.
Like, it's wild, right?
We've been spoiled for such a long time with inflation being pretty dang low. And then now all of a sudden we're dealing with this massive number. And it's when you get into foods and natural gas, it's even higher.
Yeah, I was thinking about. I heard on the news one of the anchors asked somebody like if they were to give Fed Chair Jerome Powell a grade, what would they give him? And I'm not going to talk about what this guy said because it's pretty mean. But I was thinking. Introspectively, like what grade would I give? Or better yet, if I were in Jerome Powell's chair, like what are some things that I would want to say?
Right.
Because we're staring at this like monster and we're being told like all the correct actions are being taken to fight inflation.
Yep.
But yet it still is in the headline. It's still a media headline every day. Inflation is rampant. Inflation has run away. Like there's no good news, right? So at what point does inflation start to go from something we're driving towards and is in our windshield to being in the rearview mirror? Right. We just need to get to the point where, like, I think with everything that we deal with in managing portfolios, like we don't even necessarily need to see it far in the rearview. We just need to know that we're past it. It's beside us at least. Like we're making an actual like step forward in this fight.
Right.
And it's taxing. I think
I've always thought it was going to take a minute. Like, he's going to increase the rates and they're selling back bonds to banks. That stuff takes time.
Everything
to be effective. It's got to work through it. And again, this is like we talked yesterday. It's a market cycle. It's part of it. This is what we deal with, and it's really not out of the ordinary. It might be a little extreme this time, but it's not completely out of the ordinary.
Yeah, and in the reality, I mean, $1 gone or an account value decreasing by anything isn't not fun for
Never
any
a fun
human
thing.
being.
Yeah.
But like with everything going on in the world, like it's not as bad as it could be.
Right. Yep.
Like this has actually been a fairly controlled
Yep.
correction into a market saying, hey, we're actually still really optimistic about the future, but right now we have a big problem. And we can, like, I think there's enough evidence by what's going on day to day where people are being opportunistic when the market just has been getting slightly oversold. There's been buyers stepping in,
Right?
Because there is optimism. We understand this is a temporary problem, and there's evidence to support that.
Yep.
Not just by our actions.
The buy volume is there when you're looking.
It's been huge. So I think, one thing I want to talk about with inflation, I was just thinking about like how to explain to somebody that's sitting across the table from me that doesn't know a lot about the impact or the effects of inflation, the economy, how to look at market cycles and business cycles and economic cycles and put this all together without boring them. How do I explain what I think is actually going on and why we have this quote unquote sticky inflation? So we've been every couple days, it seems like throughout the month, we get these reports that come from either like Bureau of Labor and Statistics, or even some of them are like not tied to government bureaus or nonprofits. Some of them are like ADP, who does paycheck processing.
Right.
Like they can see through the data that they have from their clients. They can understand like, hey, we had more people come to work. We're sending out more paychecks this week than we had last week. So we get this data all the time, and we're actually seeing data and statistics and facts that suggest that there is starting to be this breakdown of inflation. But it's not all the way there.
Right.
And there still are pockets where we see kind of an expanding like piece of inflation to where the overall number that we get the big headlines for every month doesn't seem to be adjusting very much. It's flattening.
Right.
There's evidence of that. But with all the effort that the Federal Reserve is like putting forth, like why aren't we starting to see decline?
Yep.
So I have a theory. I have a picture in my mind that I see, and it has nothing to do with money. So if you're listening and you want to like understand this, rest and calm yourself, because we're not going to talk about the economy. We're actually going to talk about health. We're going to talk about shock. And some of you, like, I'm pretty sure we covered this in like health class a long time ago, but my background, like being a combat medic, I remember sitting in class and learning about what trauma could do to the body. Being a medic, we were talking about kind of blast injuries or gunshot wounds, but in day-to-day life, there's vehicle accidents or, just falling down the stairs, like things can happen. So when our body has an injury that is significant, if we start losing some blood, then our body is going to go into like self-preservation mode and start to do things to try to sustain life, right? So the typical approach to seeing shock over time is more of like a decomposition of our body's capacity to support life, right? So if I have a traumatic injury, then all of a sudden, my blood pressure is going to shift, my heart rate's going to shift, my body's going to start actually changing the way it pumps blood. Like you might see people like faint because their brain stops getting blood because the body knows like the heart's very, very vital. So it starts with the medical term is called shunting. Like it starts shunting blood back, like it's blocking off exterior blood. So you'll see like the cold, clammy hands, right? The bluish, like, all this stuff that like anybody that's listening that's an EMT is like, oh yeah, I get that. Yep. And if you went through, you're like, oh, I remember signs and symptoms of basic shock stuff. What typically happens, and if you're just listening,
that chart that you drew the other day, like makes a lot of sense.
So kind of from like, again, if you're just listening, I just kind of just picture me just kind of sloping down gradually, right? So we have life, I'm living my life, my heart rate is fine, my blood pressure's fine, my temperature's fine, all these things are fine. Boom, I get into an accident. And my body starts trying to adjust to make sure that I can live as long as possible. And but slowly over time, I start my health, my livelihood starts to decline to a point of death if there's not intervention, right? So we want EMS to come, put a tourniquet on my bleeding leg and rush me off to the emergency room, and I'm good to go, right? That's what we want. We want a quick intervention when our body is preparing for a slow, steady decline. However, there's this other form of shock where it's compensated shock. If I remember correctly, this was many, many years ago. But with that, oftentimes in young children and also very, very like fit people. So a lot of me being in the Army, I was dealing with this a lot. We were being warned, hey, sometimes you'll come up with a person that might have lost a significant amount of blood, but their body is doing great at shunting, and it's actually stopped the bleeding on its own almost,
right?
Through swelling and different things. And their heart rate is actually sustaining at a pretty healthy level, and their blood pressure is actually sustaining at a pretty healthy level. So as a medic, if I show up and I wasn't aware of this compensation effort that the body can put you through when you're fit or when you're very young, I might look at one person and see, hey, this person's alert, he has a pulse, he's doing all right, and kind of ignore the fact that he's actually like maintaining this high level of life. The thing, and again, if you're listening, you can't see this, but through that compensation, you kind of sustain this high level of your body's vital signs. And then once you get to a point where your body's just like, nope, no more, you fall off a cliff. So instead of slow and steady, it's maintain, and boom, death, right? All right. So two different ways that we could potentially see kind of what's going on. And we talk a lot about financial vital signs because I believe, like I truly in my heart believe, there is so much correlation to monitoring our actual vital signs, our health vital signs, and monitoring our financial vital signs. In this case, it's a funny correlation. What I think is going on is we kind of, when the Federal Reserve flipped the switch and became hawkish, right? They were like, hey, we're going to tighten up monetary policy. We're going to make your next dollar harder to come by. If you need to borrow money, it's going to be more expensive. You're going to have to think twice about your relationship with money. Starting, now they flipped the switch, and we kind of expected this slow, steady decline of inflation to happen. But what we didn't take into consideration was how healthy our consumer, us, me, you, and listeners, how healthy we actually were financially in so many ways.
So we were able to maintain that demand.
We were the soldier, right? We were the healthy soldier I was being warned about as a medic. Like, hey, if you come up on this person, they're not less hurt. They just look okay.
Right.
But if you don't intervene, you can't catch a falling knife. Right? You're not going to save their life if they start to fall off that cliff. So pay attention. With that being said, I think what happened back in COVID, money got very, very easy to come by. We were getting free money from the government. We were business loans and hiring and expansions and new inventory and expanded inventories and more buildings and more employees. Like everything was clicking. And also we weren't traveling a lot. Expenses were lower. So I could not only save more money, I could spend more money and pay down my debt also. So when we talk about the financial vital signs of saving rate, it was going up.
It was going up. Debt rate was going down.
Two very healthy things. That's what we want. We want our clients and our listeners to have a lower level of debt. We want them to save more money, right? But what happens, what do we know about human beings is we are creatures of habit. And if we're not monitoring financial vital signs, we will, if we don't know how and measure progress when we make it, a lot of times that we are able to slip back into our old ways. So now all of a sudden we're in a place where things are more expensive. But guess what? If I was used to having, an emergency savings for 6 months, and now I have an emergency savings that's a year,
and my debt rate's down.
and I used to have $10,000 of credit card debt and $10,000 of student loans, but through COVID and now with this forgiveness, I'm basically almost to zero.
Yep.
So what can happen? Hey, that trip that you were planning on taking, the plane ticket's 50% more expensive.
Yep.
Oh, that's okay. I'll just use my credit card because I'm used to having
some debt,
right?
Yeah.
Or, hey, gas is more expensive. Maybe we should cancel that weekend trip. Nah, it's okay. I'll just pull a little money out of savings. I have a year and I only need 6 months.
Right.
Right. We're compensating. We were super healthy.
Yep.
Now we're compensating.
That's only going to last so long.
But it's frustrating because everybody's telling me that the expectation was slow and steady decline.
Mm-hmm.
What's also really kind of alarming to me is the first, like there are people that are already in economic hardship and didn't get to gain the ground that many people did during COVID.
Yep.
They're getting squeezed already, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just because the economy, like the consumer as a whole on average was good, doesn't mean that every consumer, every listener, every person out there is actually good, right? So that's really kind of like...
And to add to that, and the other aspect of that is the market performance. I just looked at from the bottom of COVID until the market made its turn, is almost 60% return, like in a little over 12 months.
Yeah.
So people are looking at their portfolios going, oh, this is how much money I have. Well, not really. This is the value of your portfolio. But again, their portfolio is up 60% if they were participating in the market. Their debt rate's going down. Their saving rate's double or more than what it usually is. It's almost like that. Again, that's the market cycle of euphoria.
Money
we're
was
all
easy.
up here. Money was easy. And now we're going back in the contraction mode and going back towards the trough.
Yeah. So I think hopefully with that, like, picture in my mind relating how I see what's going on to going through like that compensated shock, like we're getting to a point and it's not like falling off a cliff in some sort of doom. I'm not trying to scare people.
No doomsday
it's not the doomsday
scenario here.
What I'm saying is I think at some point we'll continue what I'm trying to prepare the brain to hear for a little bit of time is inflation's not going down. It's sticky. It's stubborn. It's here to stay. It's going to be hard. The Fed's going to have to go way further than they ever imagined. I can't predict the future. Maybe all that's true, but I think what's more of a reality is the Fed will continue to employ its tools to make money tight, and at some point we as human beings are going to realize we're getting close to or uncomfortably close to or back to or without choice we have to go back to a point where our savings is depleted back to our bare minimum comfort, and for some of the people that's zero. Right. And and then our debt levels are going to go back to, well, I used to have $20,000 of debt, so I have $20,000 more to spend. Right. So there's still enough demand, but guess what? Eventually, if prices continue to stay where they're at, what ends up happening is my savings goes to zero, my debt goes back to maximum, because unfortunately, like our government,
and that's when it stops.
Our government has the ability to go into meetings once a year or more and just be like, hey, let's take a vote. Can we at the table vote to increase our debt limit? And they're like, sure,
yeah,
more debt, it's more spending, like just go do it. Right. We don't have, like you and I, Josh, like I can't just be like, hey, I can't walk into a bank and be like, hey, you know what? I voted for myself to have more money. So please give it to me.
Right.
Like we can't, like, right. We have to apply. We have we have a certain amount where at some point people are going to be like, I'm not giving you more money. Like you're maxed out. So savings goes back down to areas where we are like comfortable with, but at a very like cautious or fearful place because we're losing our nest egg, our 6 months of savings or 3 months, whatever it might be. at that same point, we're spending, we're putting things more on credit cards, or taking out HELOCs or whatever the case may be, and our debt's creeping back up, right? And at some point, maybe we have to make a choice to go past what we feel was healthy, and then we get to our cap.
Right.
At some point, either whether we make the choice to stop spending, or whether just money makes the choice for us.
So we're forced to make the choice.
At some point, the spending stops. And when that happens, and again, it's not going to be quite a cliff because we're all in different places, right? I might have a little bit more capacity for debt than some of our listeners. Some people might have more savings than me. So maybe I could become restricted on my spending way before somebody listening. It'll happen at different, but there's enough people in the United States to realize like we're not all totally different. At some point there's going to be chunks of people being like, hey, I got nothing left to spend. Like, just cancel the trip, or, hey, it's ramen and it's not steak tonight. That kind of thing. Like those hard decisions when money gets tight. I think at some point we start seeing large chunks of inflation come down. And that will be the crumbling of, and guess what? As many tools as the Fed has, and here's why it's not doomsday. To like, just when we go through these recessionary periods, we're trying to curb demand so that supply can come back. We're trying to balance out what money should be like to us, right? As far as like how much it should cost, how free it should be, or how accessible it should be.
Right.
We're trying to control that inflation. So we get kind of put into these situations where money becomes tight. We go into a recessionary period, whether it's an actual recession or not, doesn't matter. We slow down.
Again, it's something that has to happen.
And then the Fed has the tools to turn money back on. Right? So it's not a doomsday scenario, right? It really isn't. I don't think we have to be afraid of this.
Again, in understanding
it's just
the market, understanding the cycles, understanding that we're going to go through it. You're never not going to go through it. If you have money in the market, you're not always going to be up.
I hope that like nobody's listening as Brandon's like, Brandon just compared this to dying. That's not.
No, that
that's
example
not the
makes
correlation.
great sense though.
Just how we can compensate as human beings translates to, I think, how we're compensating as a consumer right now.
Right.
Spending a little bit
high
more
savings rate, low debt rate. We're able to sustain and maintain to a certain point, and then we're back to where we were before or worse.
And just to also, I think it's so important. I've said this a couple times now, but I need everybody to just chew on this, is of all the things that could happen to derail any future plans, inflation is the biggest monster.
It's always inflation.
It is the head of the snake. It is the worst thing that could derail anything. So going through a brief time of discomfort, if we're sticking to our plans, we should be able to endure that. Going through a little bit of stress and these like red letters and numbers all over the news media screens, like going through all of that for a short time, absolutely worth it if it means the inflation beast gets
curbed.
Like that's, I just think like to imagine, like, and you can Google countries like Venezuela and just see what their people have to go through since that country just has runaway inflation problems. Like it's not healthy. There's countries all over the world that have untamed, uncapped, crazy inflation things where one day could change the price of a loaf of bread by hundreds of dollars.
Right.
Like it's insane. So,
and it's happened.
And it is happening.
Not here, but
like it is happening. So the Fed has to be aggressive. We just have to work with them and kind of let the markets be like, oh, hey, we're down here because we're staring this big beast and it's not that bad. That though, I mean, I how important is just monitoring your vital signs? Like it's so important. I think we need to jump in to burn rate. Burn rate is a vital sign that measures our spending habits. And we have like a great kind of PDF presentation to work through. We're obviously going to talk and explain it too, but if you are watching this and not just listening to us, then you'll actually be able to see this if you pull up the video. And also if you are a subscriber to our app,
you'll be able to see everything.
You can get in there. If you're a subscriber, I'm happy to email you this report. Yeah. So, and if you're not a subscriber and you're interested in kind of like, hey, I don't know what this is, check out www.harpethwealthpartners.com. And there's some stuff that we do. And one of them, you can kind of see our app and stuff that you can subscribe to and how you can get involved there. So jumping in, why is burn rate a vital sign, a financial vital sign? Largely because we have to know your habits. We, as a planner, even if you're not working with a planner, if you're working for yourself, like if you're preparing for someday to be financially independent, which is a huge goal, to have financial freedom and independence for all of us, if that is a goal for you or a consideration or something you aspire to for one day, how you spend money and your relationship with spending money should be monitored, because what you can start to see is, oh, my spending increases a little bit every year. We can multiply that and we can kind of start looking into the future a little bit to say, hey, this would probably be a safe amount to plan for down the road for spending.
Right.
I was thinking about this the other day. All right. How much, Josh, how old are you?
36.
All right. Let's just pretend, like, first of all, like, what day do you want to retire? How old do you want to be when you're like walking away?
Am I making this up or?
Oh no! Like, do you know a number off the top of your head?
I don't have a number.
Nobody. That's a dumb question.
Work optional is like the thing.
I want to be work optional tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I also don't know when I'm done working.
Right.
I enjoy what I do.
Yeah.
This is fun.
Exactly.
We get to help people. I love it. So I don't know when I'm done. That's a terrible.
Yeah. Well, let's use this for an example. So if you're a school teacher, right? They have a 30-year. In order to get, I know in Georgia, for instance, you have to work for 30 years in the school system in the state in order to receive 82% of the mean of your 3 highest paid years. Mm-hmm. If you work less than that, that percentage drops dramatically. Like if you work 25 years, I think you get 66%. So as a teacher, you might ask a teacher that question and they might go, well, my 30 years, I started when I was, this age. 62 is my retirement age. They might be able to answer that question.
They know, but I guarantee you though, they don't know that they want to stop working. Or
correct.
They might aspire to be work optional before that. I think the point that I'm trying to make is that in itself, a very basic question that every financial planner is going to ask you.
Yep.
And they're going to, like, in my experience, try to pull a number out of you.
Yep.
Well, let's just Social Security says, like, let's not go there right now.
Right.
Like, and so with that, if I can't even get that as a reasonable, if I can't expect that as a reasonable answer from every person that I meet, how the heck am I supposed to ask you, hey, Josh, what do you think we were just talking about water bills. What do you think your water bill is going to be when you're
30
70
years? Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know.
Like what, like my stove is like an electric stove, right? How much is my electric? Like, I don't even know if we're going to be using electricity
right
when I'm 65, right? Like, we might be moved on to nuclear, whatever, magnetic moon dust. I don't know. Like, I don't know what we'll be using.
We have Elon Musk on our side right now, so there's no telling what.
So I can't tell you. Is my utility bill going to be more expensive?
Is it going to exist?
Or is it even going to exist?
Yeah.
Is it going to be cheaper because we've developed a cheaper way to have these resources?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
Yep.
Right. So it's really unfair to say. Another typical question: you meet a financial planner. Hey, what do you think you're going to want to spend when you're in retirement?
I hate that question.
I just told you I don't even know when I'm going to retire.
Yeah.
What do you mean? How much am I? How about this? How's your relationship with spending right now?
Yep.
Do you feel like you can make ends meet? Can you do some things that you love? Are you able to take the trips? No, I can't take. I wanted to go on vacation this year. I just didn't have the money. All right. So we know we need to at least have a little bit more income than what you have.
And you can forget about the dollar amount And when you're using our app and using burn rate, it's a percentage.
It's a percent.
So if you're used to spending 50% of your income and you retire and you know your income's here, you know in your head, hey, if I stay at 50%, I'm going to be healthy. I'm going to feel okay. I'm not going to be anxious about my income or my spending because you know that number.
Yeah.
If 50% is your number.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, and that's the thing too, is like, what if my spending is 50% of my income and my savings rate is 20% of my income? What happened? Like, let's say I am that person that wants to just, like, right now, my only goal, which if your only goal is retirement, we probably definitely need to have a long conversation because you should not be stressing and banking everything on some destination that's 20 or 10 years down the road, right? You should have goals that you can enjoy day to day, week to week, year to year. I digress. The point is
that's another podcast.
If it is my goal, like if my goal is to fund my retirement, right? If that is my only goal and I'm saving 20% of my income for that, once I hit that goal, I have a choice. Create a new goal.
Yep.
Or move that 20% into my spending.
Give myself a raise.
But you got to know these vital signs and you got to have these goals. You got to have the financial plan in place.
Right.
Not so that we're sticking to some really restrictive methodology, but to start to understand and monitor these vital signs.
Yep.
Burn rate. Like if I can tell you right now that if you're feeling anxious and feeling like you don't have enough to make ends meet, and we know what your burn rate is, then I can tell you matter of factly, we need to work on getting the burn rate, either getting your income to be a little bit more so we can increase your burn rate, or somehow changing a mindset or changing a viewpoint that you can be happier and make ends meet by living on a little bit less. Right. And then as soon as we do that, all of a sudden now work independence or financial independence maybe just went from being 40 years away to 20.
Right.
From just monitoring and understanding. So when we say words like budget or when we're measuring burn rate, it's not a restrictive thing. It's an awareness thing. And like of everything going on, like if you're,
we say it a million times, it's a vital sign that you need to know.
If you're at my daughter's age and you're 14, or if you're in your 50s, there's very few people that don't appreciate the effort or energy of spending time learning more about ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. Like that, like being self-aware, like increasing our awareness, spending time. Like for me, I love to go to mountaintops and just like camp in my truck and just like reflect on all kinds of things. Just make myself more aware of everything. Mm-hmm. Why would you not want to be aware of your relationship with spending money?
Right.
So we're going to jump in. I think one of the things that we want to talk about in this is just a simple definition. So burn rate in our app, it's a kind of a purplish brick titled BR, and it's the percentage of a client's annual gross income. So you take your total gross income, and then you just type in what you're spending. And so you take the gross income, divide it by your living expenses, and you will have a percentage. So if I make $100,000 and I'm spending $5,000 a month, that's $60,000 a year. I'm spending 60% of what I make. My burn rate is 60, right? Pretty simple. The most important thing is just month to month evaluating. Did I stay in this range? Did I happen to spend $7,000 this month?
Right.
And what's really cool about this is I was talking to a client the other day, and I was like, I'm not here to trap you into anything. Like nobody, like we don't want to develop something that traps you. We want to do something that really encourages you. And so if I understand your spending, let's say you have a few kids and all your kids were born in October, November, right? On top of that, November's Thanksgiving, December is Christmas. Your parents live across the country and you go back to Wyoming every year for Christmas. Like if the goal for you is to save, let's just hypothetically, your goal is to save, $6,000 for a Roth contribution this year. Wouldn't it be better for me to be able to see your data points month to month, and realize, hey, your spending was wildly low in January, February, March, and April. Ticked up a little bit in summer because of like some little family travel.
Yep.
Went back down, but then all of a sudden,
November,
as soon
December,
as October hit,
Yep.
birthdays, holidays, travel, like your spending went up exponentially. Right. So we can talk and we can plan from an average, but I can also say, hey, why don't we just plan for your savings contribution to be
Heavy
January,
in the front of the
February,
year.
March, April,
Exactly.
May,
Yep.
and then September.
Yep.
Right. So having these data points so critical, and it is critical to update these things month to month, because you could start to see how cash flows
Right.
work. Right. So we talked about, what is it? Client's gross income. Again, if you're just listening, I'm just kind of working through this PDF. Gave that example. It's all right there. If you need to pause it, you can write down that equation, which again is just annual living expenses divided by total personal income. That equals burn rate.
If you have the app, it does it for
If you have our app, it does it for you. We still want you putting in some data points. I want that awareness. So, and boom, which leads us right to the next page. Why is understanding your burn rate important? Spending habits affect the client's ability to save and reduce debt. It affects their ability to make work optional now or down the road. Mm-hmm. It affects the amount of insurance that you should have. It affects the amount of risk that you should take when you're actually investing any of your money. It affects the amount of savings, your emergency savings.
Yep.
Everything is affected by our relationship with spending.
We talk to a bunch of real estate folks, all the time, talking about cash flows. If you're buying rental properties, you might have a 5% rate where there's not a renter in there. You have to pay for the mortgage for those couple months. If we know what your cash flow is and your burn rate, we go, okay, it's healthy. You can handle not having a tenant for a couple months, and you can handle a little more risk in the market if you're invested in the market. But it just goes across the board. It's not just the stock market or just, it's everything.
Yeah. I think there's critical evidence here that even if it's just a simple budget, like if you want, like your Brandon's just trying to talk about this app, like call it a budget. Like you can, like YNAB is WNAB. You Need a Budget is a great app. But there's other apps out there that will help you budget different ways, measure your spending. Like do it however you need, but understanding your spending, so critically important to so many pieces of the financial ecosystem.
Yep.
It's one of the most basic financial vital signs here that you can know. I mean, I think just the awareness on that alone changes the relationship, and you can really have fun with it too. If you actually get serious about monitoring your spending and creating a budget, I tell clients or users of our app, like, I don't want you automating this process. I want you actually doing this.
Right.
Because it becomes kind of a challenge, right? Like if you're used to spending money 3 times a day, like gas station, stop and get a coffee, grabbing lunch, spending a little bit of money on the way home, whatever the case may be, and you're having to put in 3 data points every day for 30 days, your thumb gets exhausted. So then all of a sudden it's like, actually, I'm going to try to spend money just once every 3 days. And you'll actually, you could probably clean up your spending so much just by monitoring. But it's not even necessarily about just reducing spending. It's about being aware.
Yep.
Right. Tracking is just so necessary. So this little blurb here, budgeting is optional, tracking is necessary. The reality is healthy spending doesn't always require detailed budgeting, but at a minimum, we should all be tracking our spending habits. If you're working with an advisor, your advisor should understand your relationship with spending and your relationship with money. It's just so critical. So we have to know these things about ourselves, and we have to know these things, for me and Josh, about our clients to understand where our client is. We need to understand about ourselves so we know where we are, and we also need to understand where we are so we can directionally move towards where we want to be, right? So when in here we talk about how do we use this vital sign burn rate. I think the biggest thing here to take away is just that this is like you have a relationship with spending money, and that relationship, just like any relationship in life, ebbs and flows and changes and goes up and down and all kinds of stuff. the critical piece to this is ongoing continual monitoring, so that way data points get accumulated over time and we have a ton of data to make strong decisions from. If I go to the doctor and say, hey doc, skin's a little warm, and he takes my temperature and it's 99.1, like, oh, you don't have a fever. But if I have 1,000 data points where my normal temperature is 96.5, I don't know if that's healthy. Let's just take that.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, then maybe if he would have had all these data points, he would have been like, oh, you actually are a little warmer than usual. Maybe something is going on. Maybe you're coming in just a little bit sooner before your temperature spikes to 100. Right. So just understanding, like, this is not something, you're not going to sit down 1 month and have a perfect number. It's going to be a rough number, and it's going to get refined over time. But every data point starts to matter. So just, and
the more we have, the better decisions we can make.
Yeah. Tracking it is so important. So we have here, so burn rate as a vital sign. What is healthy? So I gave you an example. I make $100,000. I spend 60 in a year. My burn rate is 60%. Is that healthy? I think that is such a healthy when it comes to burn rate is a hard decision to make as like a broad, like just speaking into a microphone that's going out to the universe right now. It's hard to say what is healthy or what is not. Well,
that goes back to what we were talking about. Is it necessary or unnecessary spending?
Yeah.
Like we talked about it during debt month. Is it necessary debt or unnecessary debt? Same thing with burn rate.
If I have a car to get my kids to school, I pay my utility bills to keep the lights on and the house warm. I keep food on the table. And I get my kids new shoes when they need them, that kind of thing. Like if I'm spending money only on necessary things, as long as you're making as much as you're spending, like you can't call that unhealthy. Correct. Some people are actually even listening to this are in survival mode. They are a single mom or a single dad with a couple kids at home, and they just don't make a ton of money. So their burn rate is effectively almost 100% of what they make. They make $40,000 a year. They actually get a tax return because they have some child tax credits and different things like that. They're not paying any taxes, so they get a big refund at the end of the year. And they're spending, actually, like with their taxes being they're getting money back, and they're spending 100% of their income, and and then some of that tax return, or all that tax return too, just to survive. Okay, so here's if you're not in survival mode, right? So let's talk about some of these ranges. If you're a person that's making somewhere less than $100,000 a year, you will probably see a healthy burn rate of between 50 and 70. All right. 50 and 70%. If you start to get over 70%, we'll call that unhealthy, because what we will assume is that you are paying some taxes and you are trying to save some, but those two things are competing with one another. So you're probably having to sacrifice the amount of money you're saving. So your goals that you set, the big financial purpose of your life, or the purpose in your life just generally, may not be accomplished because we're not setting aside capital to execute goals on those things. Right. So once we start seeing 80% spending, well, if I'm a single dude and I'm making $100K, I'm probably paying 24, maybe 22% in taxes. So now all of a sudden I'm down and I'm spending 78%. That means I'm saving nothing. Right. So we can call that unhealthy. If you're in the $100,000 to $250,000 range, 45 to 65% of your is a healthy range. Lower the better. 250 to 500,000, about 40 to 60% of your money getting spent is pretty healthy. If you're making over $500,000, 30%, maybe up to 50% is healthy spend rate. The biggest thing here is where the tipping point for all of these is, do you have the flexibility or the freedom to choose to save the money you need to save to accomplish your goals?
Yep.
If you don't have a relationship with saving money because you're spending, you're cornered into spending money on a month-to-month basis, that's not a good relationship with spending. You can't have a relationship with spending to sacrifice your relationship with savings, right? So that's the tipping point for me. If I'm sitting down with somebody like Brandon, I'm spending every dollar that I get, and I want to be saving a little bit of money, and I just can't. That's unhealthy, right? That's anxiety inducing, and we need to get rid of that. So a couple correlating factors to burn rate. Typically, what we've seen on like several hundred people that were kind of studied as far as their burn rates go, we did notice, and this is kind of obvious, right? People with lower burn rate scores typically were saving more money, and they were also, like, matter of factly, just older, right? Which makes sense. Like, when you're young, when you're in your 30s, you haven't made it to the peak of your income years. You're paying for kids and you're paying for all this stuff, right?
Right.
What we've noticed with people, the most common factors of people with higher burn rate scores, they lived in areas where it was higher cost of living, they had larger families, and they also had more healthcare needs. So everything else is just kind of like there wasn't enough evidence. Like, you would think people with lower burn rate scores would have more income. That wasn't true. That actually was not true. It was they either had higher savings rates or they were overclassed. Same thing if you had higher burn rate scores, that's people with less income. That was not true either. The biggest indicators of the top three: higher cost of living, large family, more healthcare needs. Understand that ways that we can kind of cross the hurdle of going from high spending to reduced spending, focusing on your fixed expenses where you can. So cutting cost on things that may not be useful or may not align with like what makes you happy. I have some things that I've cut out just because I feel like they're kind of duplicated, like some of these subscriptions to TV things. It's like, okay, I'm just paying for too much. And also, what matters to me is spending time with my daughter, like getting her out of the house, going to like the climbing gym. Like if I'm subscribing to these things, just give me more options to watch more TV, I'm not giving the time. Like, it's actually taking me away from aligning with my goals. So that is money that is spent to combat me, not to make me better. Right. So I can cut costs by removing some of these fixed expenses. Again, one of the biggest hurdles as far as a functional hurdle goes, spending not tracked. You got to track it. If you're not tracking it, you don't know it. You don't realize that things are escaping. Dollars are escaping from the barn, and you have no idea.
And that's typically what we see with new clients coming on that we're onboarding. 9 times out of 10, they tell us they're spending $4 or $5 grand a month. They're really spending 7 or 8 because they don't track it. And then once we start tracking it, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm actually spending $8,000 a month
every time."
Yeah, every time.
Emotional hurdles are out there too. So these aren't just things that we can turn off by just like seeing it on a spreadsheet, so to speak. Sometimes we have like that mentality of keeping up with the Joneses, right? Yep. The social circle that we belong to sometimes requires us to spend money that we may not necessarily even want to. But if we want to have a friendship or relationship, or we want to be in the social circle, they're all spending money. We need to as well. Right. It's hard to say no to that. Family history. You could have experiences in your family or influence how you feel about spending today. I know people that I've used an example, like people that have a terrible relationship with spending. They don't want to spend money even though they have it, because they were raised in a family where they've seen a ton of loss, like financial devastation. So they're protecting every dollar. I've also seen little things like, or I've alluded to the fact of like, before on one of the podcasts of like, you know, if I get an ice cream sandwich every time I was being good as a child, now all of a sudden, like something good happens, I'm like, man, I really want an ice cream sandwich. So like sometimes just these behaviors, these things that are ingrained in us from how we were raised do affect us. Family history, past experiences, that's all there. What is like, how do we improve this score? Yep. So again,
we kind of already talked about.
Yeah. The biggest thing here is if you don't have to feel anxious about spending money if your savings is appropriate. What's appropriate for everyone is wildly different. It depends on your goals. It depends on your work, what you're working towards. But if you're like, I would argue some people think they're saving enough, but they're taking insane risks in their portfolio and in their investments because they're relying on the market to get them to where, instead of relying on what they want. So they're like, oh, I'm saving 10%, but I'm expecting 15% return from the market.
Yep.
And you're just going to be stressed out and you're not going to be successful. Whereas you could cut savings and save 25%, be there quicker, have less reliance and less risk and exposure and all that stuff. Yep. So it's just really, really important to understand, like,
and the ride in the market's a lot smoother.
Tracking spending is like hand in hand. Like you will improve your burn rate if you track your spending. Should you go with like a percentage? Like I know that like I spent all from this account. I spent $5,000. I know I spent $5,000 last month. I'm putting that number down. Or should you actually have a detailed budget? That's how that's going to be an introspective thing of what you need to work through. And then also just like I said, looking for patterns, identifying patterns. Again, just like the example we gave, spending all your money in October, November, December because of birthdays and holidays and travel and all this stuff. If there are large inconsistencies,
right?
If you're monitoring, you see it immediately. You can identify it and you can say, "Hey, is this a one-off inconsistent thing? Did I overspend? Did I need something? Was there a healthcare bill, or is this actually just my new reality for my burn rate?"
Right.
And if you're tracking it, you see it right away, and it's easy to adjust. And the last thing for healthy burn rate: are you intentionally spending your money on things that are actually important to you? Or are you wasting? Are you being a good consumer or a good person to yourself?
Right.
That's the biggest thing. There's a great study on empathy and like how people will save more. Like the more empathetic they are, they think about themselves in the future as another person. And once they were able to see their future self as a different person because they have a ton of empathy, they were like eager to save for that person. Save what, like, you have to align your money, your dollars with what's important to you. So we've given a lot, like there's a case study in here. We're not going to get into that. We're going to wrap up. But just understanding that, burn rate's incredibly vital and you just got to be able to track that. So, I will leave you with that. Well, Josh, what do you got?
Yep. That's about it. We've covered everything, I think, for burn rate for this month.
Yep. We will have another podcast this month, and then we'll jump into next month. And I am not 100% sure on what that one is. What are we jumping into?
It is total term.
Total term. Financial independence. That will be a great conversation. So in between now and then, we're actually going to talk a little bit about our one-page plan. And why we think this is our path to financial planning. We love it. We embrace it. And we think that it's very, very relevant and important. We're going to transition into financial independence via the one-page plan. We'll talk a lot of psychology, and we'll talk a lot about the human experience, and we'll talk a lot about what financial independence is. It's going to be a good conversation. Next month, we'll definitely focus deep on our private Zoom calls for our subscribers about what and how and when financial independence arrives. So stay tuned. Appreciate your time and hope this was a good podcast and you learned something. Take care. We hope you learned from our conversation today. It is important to us that you know this is for educational purposes and not intended to be considered specific advice for any individual listener. If something we discussed is relevant to you and you have questions of how it might be applicable to your specific situation, please reach out to your financial professional. Of course, we are happy to have further conversations with you regarding specific questions or applications to your individual financial situation. With that, here are a few disclosures. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group and Harpeth Wealth Partners are separate entities from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Hypothetical examples presented are not representative of any specific investments. Your results may vary. With that, thank you, and we look forward to having you back. Take care.